My name is Tiffany Esquivel. I'm a former Army logistics officer, and yesterday I buried my husband, Captain Mark Esquivel. The ceremony was flawless, the kind of military precision he would have appreciated. The folded flag still sits on my kitchen table, the corners sharp and perfect. I haven't had the strength to move it. When the last guest left, I drove home in silence, letting the hum of the tires drown out the ache that sat heavy in my chest. The house looked exactly the same as we'd left it. The porch light still burned from the night before the accident. I remember thinking how unfair it was that the world could stay so normal while mine had stopped. The air inside was still thick with his scent, cedar and clean linen. I placed the flag on the mantel and just stood there. The quiet pressed against me. I had spent years in war zones where silence meant danger, but this was different. This silence was grief, raw and endless. I wanted to collapse, to finally let the weight of it crush me, but before I could even take a full breath, I heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. 3 cars pulled up. I recognized them instantly. The Esquivel family never came without a purpose. Mark's father, Raymond, stepped out first, still wearing his black funeral suit, looking more like a general than a grieving parent. Behind him came his sons, Mark's brothers, their faces drawn but not in sorrow. His mother, Gloria, walked last, her expression unreadable, her pearl necklace gleaming even in the cloudy light. I opened the door before they could knock, hoping maybe they'd just come to check on me. I was wrong. "Tiffany," Raymond said, his voice steady, too steady. "We need to talk." I stepped aside, mostly out of habit, not invitation. They filed in like a command unit taking position. Gloria's eyes scanned the living room, and I could almost see her calculating what belonged to whom. She looked at the framed photo of Mark and me on the mantel, her lips tightening. "We'll keep that one of him," she said softly. "You can take your copy if you'd like." For a moment, I didn't understand. My body was still running on grief, not logic. "What do you mean?" I asked. Raymond straightened his shoulders. "This house, the cars, everything here, they're part of the Esquivel family estate. Now that Mark is gone, it all reverts to the bloodline." He said bloodline like it was a legal term, something sacred I had violated. "Your service was admirable," he added, like a condolence. "But it's time to let the family handle its own affairs." I felt the room tilt. I had faced ambushes, mortar fire, and nights where every sound could mean death, but nothing compared to that sentence. My knees wanted to give, but years of training held me upright. My pulse hammered, my throat burned. "This was our home," I said, my voice low but steady. "Mark and I built this together." Raymond didn't flinch. "Mark built it with family money. You were part of his life, Tiffany. Not part of this legacy." Gloria sighed, as if I were a stubborn child refusing to share. "You'll have enough to start over," she said. "We're not monsters." She turned and gestured toward one of the brothers, who had already started unplugging the lamp by the window. That small act snapped something inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw them out, to remind them of the medals folded into that flag. Instead, I just stood still. Years of military discipline turned my fury into stillness. They mistook it for surrender. My hands shook as I pressed them against my sides. Every breath felt measured, deliberate. "You're in my house," I finally said. Raymond met my gaze, eyes sharp. Not for long. He nodded to his sons, who began hauling boxes toward the door. I watched them move, every sound echoing in my head like boots on a parade ground. I could feel my heart harden with every step they took. When they finally paused, waiting for me to react, I simply stepped aside, not because they were right, but because I wasn't going to give them the spectacle they wanted. I had seen too many people lose their dignity in chaos. I wasn't going to be one of them. I stared at the doorway, memorizing every detail, every word, every insult. They thought they were closing this chapter. They had no idea this was just the beginning. The first time Mark and I saw the lot, it was just a patch of dirt and scrubby trees on the edge of town. He stood there in his jeans and worn boots, squinting at the sun like he could already see the walls go up. I teased him for dreaming too big. He laughed and said, "I've never been afraid of starting from nothing, especially when I'm building it with you." That's the kind of man Mark was. Steady, patient, always building. We poured the foundation together the month after he left active duty. I'd just transferred to reserves, and we had time to breathe for the first time in years. He called it our next mission. Every nail, every coat of paint, every cabinet was a choice we made side by side. There's a dent in the floor near the pantry from when I dropped the toolbox. He never let me fix it. Said it made the house feel real. That house didn't just hold our furniture. It held our history. It held mornings with burnt coffee, nights falling asleep with the TV on, and weekends filled with music from the old speaker he refused to replace. Mark's family visited once during construction. They didn't bring food or tools, just questions. Gloria asked if I planned to keep working after children before we'd even finished the plumbing. Raymond inspected the studs like he were judging whether they'd last. They never asked how we'd pay for it or what it meant to us. They assumed Mark would fall back into their orbit eventually. They didn't see our home as a beginning. To them, it was a detour, an inconvenience. But Mark never wavered. I remember him putting his arm around me that night after they left and saying, "This place is ours, Tiff. No one else gets to define that." It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have marble countertops or imported tiles, but it was where we built a life away from everything that tried to pull us apart. He made a shelf in the hallway just for my army coins and challenge pins. He said it reminded him how much I'd survived before we even met. When Mark died, everything in that house carried his fingerprints. The tool set under the stairs. The hand-sketched blueprint was still pinned behind the laundry door. A tiny scuff on the wall where his guitar bumped each time he picked it up. Coming back to that place after his funeral felt like walking into his arms. I sat in the doorway for hours, watching dust float through the light. For a moment, it was quiet. In a good way. Like he was still somewhere in the walls. That illusion shattered fast. They came back 2 days later. This time with paperwork. Nothing legal. Just printouts with bank headers and family names. Like they thought logos made them right. They stood in the entryway, making their case in flat voices, like it was a board meeting. Gloria handed me a box and told me to take the memories that matter. Raymond said I had until Sunday. That gave me 4 days to erase 10 years. I didn't cry, not then. Not while I boxed up the wedding album or folded the flag back into its case. I packed in silence, one drawer at a time, each item peeling something loose in my chest. I left the guest room for last. That's where Mark used to write his notes when he couldn't sleep. His journal still sat open on the nightstand. I ran my fingers over the last line he wrote. "Tiff is the only thing that makes this house a home." I stared at those words until the page blurred. That was the moment my grief shifted. The ache cracked open into something hotter, heavier. I wasn't just mourning a man. I was being erased by people who never really saw me. They weren't just taking space. They were rewriting the story we wrote together, turning our home into some artifact of their bloodline narrative. As I taped the last box shut, I whispered goodbye to each corner. Not because I was giving up, but because I needed those walls to remember me if I never saw them again. When I stepped onto the porch, the sun hit our initials carved into the rail. I ran my thumb across them. T+M. Still there. Still ours. No one could take that part. Not even them. It was nearly midnight when I remembered the safe behind the coat rack. Mark had installed it 2 years ago, hidden behind a false panel in the hallway closet. He said it was just for insurance papers and boring grown-up stuff. I never questioned it. I didn't have the code, but my fingers moved without thinking. I typed in his badge number. The light turned green. Inside, there was a single thick envelope with my name in his handwriting. Across the front, written in bold, slanted ink, "Only open when it gets ugly." My stomach dropped. I sank to the floor with it in my lap, my back pressed against the wall. I waited a few minutes before breaking the seal. Part of me hoped it would just be a love letter. It wasn't just that. There were legal documents. Notarized. Clear. A quitclaim deed transferring the house entirely to my name. Bank statements. Showing Mark had moved our joint savings into an account solely under me. A right of survivorship clause tied to everything we owned. Each page came with its own weight. Each one screamed, he knew. At the bottom was a letter. Folded twice, worn at the creases. My name at the top. And that steady, confident scrawl I hadn't seen in weeks. I held it like it might shatter. Tiff, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And things have gotten bad. I'm sorry. I should have said more while I was here. But I know my family. I know how they think. I saw the way they looked at you, and it boiled my blood. I didn't want you to ever feel like you had to fight them alone. I paused, pressing the page to my chest. My eyes burned, but I kept going. I've tried to love them, even when they made it hard. But loving someone doesn't mean giving them everything. You were the only one who built anything real with me. Every brick in that house was ours. Every late-night budget. Every argument over backsplash colors. That was real. Not a trust fund. Not a family name. You. Me. Us. I read that part twice. I've set everything up to protect you. The house is yours. The accounts are yours. If they try anything, call Charles Bell. He's a lawyer, and he owes me a favor. I've stored everything in his office, just in case. I know it feels like war. But you've been through worse. You'll win this too. His words hit me like armor I didn't know I had. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't abandoned. He'd been watching out for me, even in death. The last paragraph was short. I married you because you're the only person who ever saw me fully and stayed. No bloodline will ever mean more than that. Whatever happens next, know I planned for it. And I chose you. Every single time. I folded the letter back, hands trembling but steady enough. For the first time since he died, I felt my spine straighten. I looked at the scattered papers around me. This wasn't just paperwork. It was a strategy. It was love in its fiercest form. Mark hadn't just built a life with me. He built a defense. I wasn't alone. The next morning, I called the number Mark had written in his letter. A woman answered, calm and clipped, and when I gave my name, she didn't hesitate. "Mr. Bell has been expecting you," she said. "Come by at 11. That was it. No small talk, no questions. Just certainty. The law office sat in a converted craftsman house on the edge of downtown. When Charles Bell stepped into the lobby, I understood. He was in his 60s, with white hair slicked back, eyes sharp behind wireframe glasses. His handshake was firm, and he looked me straight in the eye like he already knew everything about me. We sat down in a small conference room, and he slid a file across the table. "Mark left instructions," he said. "Clear ones. And backups." I opened the folder. It mirrored what I'd seen in the safe, but with more. Audio recordings. Witness signatures. Certified filings stamped and sealed. He didn't trust his family, Bell said. Didn't think they'd respect his wishes. I nodded. He was right. Bell smiled without amusement. He was always 3 steps ahead. He walked me through the key pieces. The deed transfer wasn't just signed. It had been filed 6 months ago, with a survivorship clause that made it legally mine the second Mark passed. The bank accounts were already locked. But the most powerful piece was the no contest clause in his final trust. If any beneficiary challenged the documents, they'd forfeit everything, including the fallback inheritance Mark had quietly set aside for them. Bell looked at me, voice level. He wanted to give them a choice. They can take what he left and walk, or they can fight and get nothing. Either way, you don't lose. Bell paused the recording of Mark's voice he'd been playing. "I'll handle the legal delivery, but he asked that you be the one to speak, if you're willing." I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'll do it," he nodded. "Then we'll set the meeting." As I stood to leave, he added one last thing. "Mark didn't just leave a plan. He left you a shield, and you're holding it now. I walked out of that office straighter than I had in weeks. The grief was still there, but it was something I carried with purpose. That night, I packed a small folder with every document and laid out the clothes I'd wear. Not a suit. My army dress blues. I wanted them to remember who I was. Not a widow. A soldier. And now, Mark's last line of defense. The Esquivel family arrived on time, dressed like they were attending a deposition, not a reckoning. Raymond wore his military blazer, badges polished. Gloria looked like she was headed to church. The brothers kept their arms crossed. We met in a small rented conference room. Charles Bell sat at the head of the table. I sat beside him in full army dress blues, shoes shining, shoulders square. I didn't speak when they entered. I just looked at them, steady and calm. That seemed to rattle them more than I expected. Gloria glanced at my uniform, then looked away. Charles opened the meeting with formality. "Thank you for coming. As executor of Captain Mark Esquivel's estate, I'm obligated to present the contents of his legal filings." He opened the first folder. "These are Mark's final instructions. The property transfer, the house is Mrs. Esquivel's, the bank accounts. All under survivorship clauses, fully executed prior to Mark's death. No room for dispute." I watched Raymond's jaw tighten. Gloria pursed her lips. The brothers didn't move. Raymond finally spoke. His voice controlled. "This is absurd. A temporary lapse in judgment. Mark was unwell. We will be contesting this in probate court." Charles Bell smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Of course, you have the right to do that, Mr. Esquivel," Bell said, leaning back. "However, I must advise you to read Section 4B of the trust, the no contest clause." Raymond looked confused. Bell continued. "It states that should any party challenge the validity of these filings, they forfeit all beneficiary rights. That includes the $100,000 he designated to be divided among surviving Esquivel relatives, provided they accept without dispute." He let that land. The air went still. Bell pushed 4 envelopes across the table. "Mark gave you a choice," Bell said. "You can accept his wishes, take the $100,000, and walk away. Or you can fight my client, get nothing, and face a countersuit for emotional distress. The choice is yours." Raymond opened his mouth, then closed it again. Gloria looked like she wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. One of the brothers slowly reached for an envelope. I finally stood up, my uniform creaking slightly. I didn't look at the envelopes. I looked at Raymond. "This isn't a negotiation," I said quietly. "This is closure. Mark was always 3 steps ahead of you. He knew exactly who you were." They stood up one by one. No handshakes. No apologies. Just stiff backs and unreadable faces. Raymond gave me one last look at the door. A mix of something between rage and respect. Then they were gone. Charles finally exhaled. "He planned every angle." I nodded. "He always did." I gathered the papers and stood. My legs felt strong. My hands were steady. I wasn't a widow being pushed out of her home anymore. I was the one holding the line. And this war, I'd already won. I've worn a uniform into battle, carried friends off the field, and stood silent in more funerals than I care to count. But nothing prepared me for losing Mark. Not the grief, not the silence, and especially not the betrayal that came after. I thought I was alone. I thought I'd been erased. But Mark had been fighting for me all along, in ways I never saw coming. His plan wasn't just about property or paperwork. It was his way of saying, "You still belong here. You still matter." In a world that tried to push me aside, he gave me something no one could steal. Dignity, love, the strength to stand. If you're listening to this, and you've been made to feel small or invisible, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not what they say you are. You are not what they try to take from you. Sometimes, the ones we love leave behind more than memories. Sometimes, they leave us with armor. And sometimes, we become our own shield. Mark is gone, but he never let go. And now, neither will I.